PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. Going into round 5 of the candidates tournament, we had Jan Nepomniachtchi in the lead with 3 points. Then Gukesh and Caruana on 2.5, Praggnanandhaa on 2. And there was a very interesting matchup. We had Praggnanandhaa playing white against the leader Jan Nepomniachtchi. So far in this tournament, Pragg has been playing some pretty heavy preparation, and this game was no exception. So Pragg played e4, e5, knight f3, and Nepo played knight f6. So the Petrov, which he used very successfully. He's used very successfully over the last few years in candidates tournaments, but also in the World Championship match against Carlsen. Now, he got tripped up a few times, but there's no doubt that he knows this backwards. So well prepared in this opening. So it's pretty brave for Pragg to take him on in this line. And indeed, Pragg goes for one of the main lines. And we've seen how well prepared Pragg is so far in the tournament. So just generally, he works very hard his openings. And his second, or one of his seconds for this candidates tournament is Peter Svidler, who is a very renowned theoretician. So this is mainline Petrov, where white seeks to undermine the position of that knight in the middle, and black holds firm, holding that pawn on d5. Knight c3 exchanges off the knight. So this is absolute main line. And white has a nice centre, but black has pretty free development for his pieces. And the king is castled, so can't be that bad for black. Bishop f5. I mean, Nepo has actually played this. He's played this with white and black. This variation actually. Bishop g5 attacks the queen, so the queen moves out to a5, which looks in these directions, so looks like on a good square. Knight h4. Now, I know this looks a bit wacky to put the knight at the side of the board, but it does attack that bishop. And so knight h4 is kind of a disruptive move, and it might allow the queen to enter the game along this diagonal as well. Bishop drops back to e6. Both players playing these moves pretty quickly. They're both absolutely in their preparation. Bishop takes bishop. Now you don't recapture with a pawn because that just leaves an isolated pawn on e6. So queen takes g5. There we go. The queen swoops over. Knight back to f3. Attacking the queen. Both players still playing pretty quickly. And now the bishop moves back to h3. Looks like a slightly strange square, h3. Normally you'd rather put the bishop back on this diagonal. But one of the points is that it stops the knight moving out to d7. And that's... really that knight would like to go to d7 and then perhaps to f6 just to kind of shore up the king side. And Nepo has had exactly this position before as black. And in that game against Mamedov, so this was an online game, he played queen c7. And Mamedov was a little bit better here with white and ended up winning this game. You can see that white has quite a nice centre. It's a little bit better for white. But very quickly, Nepo took that pawn instead of playing queen c7. So this has not been seen before, not been played before. Novelty. So both players have come well armed to this game. Interestingly, Pragg didn't slow down. He was anticipating this new move. He's obviously analysed it himself. Rook b1. Okay, threatening to take the b pawn. And you can see that black is just a little bit behind in development because of that knight on b8. The rooks aren't connected. It's not so easy to defend that pawn. Well, you can defend it by moving the b pawn, but that weakens this pawn. And of course, the rook comes into the game with tempo. Rook b3 attacks the queen, which goes back, and the queen has reached the 3rd rank. You never know when that could be very useful. Still, both players playing quite quickly. d5 also played almost instantly by Pragg. So we're on move 19 and all preparation. Now after d5, a very interesting move, I'll go into that in a second, Nepo thought for 40 minutes, 40 minutes. So this move rather caught him by surprise. So what's the point of d5? Well, it's about cutting black's queen out of the action on the king's side. You can see if I just put the pawn back a moment, you can see the queen controls, for example, the g5 square, so the knight can't hop to g5. After d5, that cuts the queen out of the action. So knight g5, for example, is possible. So, well, let's say c5, knight g5 is very strong. Look at black's pieces stuck on the queen side. The queen way across the other side of the board. And all of a sudden, we've got moves like queen h5. The rook can sweep across. The bishop coming in to one of these squares. It's really dangerous. Okay, so what does black do about this pawn? Well, really it should be taken. But if queen takes d5, that's not good for black. That just skewers and wins the piece. So it has to be taken because, I mean, really you need to move the knight out, but, you know, that can be taken. So pawn takes pawn. But the queen is shut out from g5, so knight g5. White is 2 pawns down, but this is a really dangerous attack because black's pieces are shut out of play, particularly the queen. And these pieces are really active. The queen is about to fly into the game, given a chance. So again, Nepo had a think here, thought for almost 9 minutes in this position. And he played h6, a really provocative move. Could play g6, but then perhaps bishop g4 with the idea of swinging that rook along the 3rd rank into the attack. That's interesting. In any case, I'll leave you to work that one out. Still a very tricky position. But h6, I mean, this basically provokes white into sacrificing. Nepo knew exactly what he was doing here. And after very little thought, I suspect Pragg was still in his preparation, he banged out knight takes f7. Of course, if the knight retreats, then there's no point in giving up all these pawns. You've got to plough on. So what's the big idea? Well, if rook takes, then that's a nasty pin. Let's say knight c6, bishop d5. Whoa, lots of paint on the board. Well, you can see there's a lot of action here. There's a pin here. The bishop attacks the knight. There's a pin here. The queen is looking at that bishop here. Well, too dangerous. So Nepo played king takes knight. Okay, what next for white? I mean, it looks a little bit strange. How do you follow up here? Rook d3, a very calm follow-up. Pragg still playing almost instantly. Thought for just about a minute over this move. And this is tricky for black. Rook takes pawn threatened, hitting queen, hitting bishop. In the meantime, black's king is looking rather perilously placed on f7. Knight d7. Well, that's a practical move to bring this knight into the game. Pragg can either take here and recover the piece that way, or he could take the knight straight away. If bishop takes knight, then the king will step back. The rooks are connected. I mean, I still I slightly prefer white in this position. You know, we've got an archbishop, an archbish on d7, controlling some important squares. White is better there. So that's one way of playing, and perhaps you could try and exploit those weak light squares later. It's not, I mean, you know, black has stability too, but white could be better there. But Pragg played for rook takes pawn instead. And here was a really interesting choice from Nepo. If Nepo wanted to win a pawn, he could have played bishop takes pawn check, knight c5. So that saves the piece. Knight finds a good square. But the queen is locked out of play for a moment. Actually, after rook e1, white has a very strong initiative here. I can understand why Nepo didn't want to grab that pawn. Instead, he just played knight c5 immediately. And after rook takes, he put the king back. The difference is, if white, say, plays rook e1 here, this time it's black's move, and black can take on a2, threatens this pawn, so black has gained a tempo, basically. So it's a slightly different position. The king gets back a little bit earlier. But white is obviously better here. You know, the queen is locked out of play for a bit. Queen d5 check. So now Pragg started to take his time. King h8. Now, I'm going to take a break here and have a little drink of my tea. Cheers, folks. Have a little think. How do you play with white in this position? Pragg has done really well out of the opening. Even material, but clearly beautifully centralized pieces. He's got the advantage here. How does white actually try and press home the advantage? White play, what would you do here? Pragg played a very natural move after 12 minutes thought. Bishop f5. Probing those weak light squares. It looks nice. It's not the best move. There's a beautiful move here. Queen e5. Threatening rook takes h6 check. If king g8, then we've got some nice tactics here. Rook g6 threatens mate. I mean, this is just a storming initiative. Here, you can take the pawn. Queen d5 check. There we go. Double attack. And you take this. White has won a pawn. And that's a big pawn to win. With only one pawn on the king's side, you can see the king is exposed. The queen re-centralizes. White's a pawn up. Good chances. Okay, what about queen takes a2? Well, white could snap that pawn off here. But it's an even better move. Bishop f5. This is absolutely beautiful. So rook takes h6 is now a serious threat, because bishop h7 would follow. So king g8. Now watch this. I think this is really instructive. Of course, this is very computery. Hits the queen. Comes back. Queen b2. I love this move. Threatening not only bishop a2, but also queen c2. So white is attacking on both these diagonals, and there is no good way out for black here. So for example, queen f4. Okay, we'll give a check if the queen goes back. Then queen c2. I mean, that's a killer. Let's say king h8. Again, queen c2. That's really nasty. So rook f7. Okay, rook d1. Some nasty things happening here. Here, f3. And black just gets caught on these diagonals. Black has a whole move to defend, but there's nothing. I mean, bishop g6 is a threat. Queen c2 is coming soon. Black is actually lost here. I think that is an incredible idea. Just let me show that one more time. Bishop f5, and then this beautiful retreat, queen b2, and that should seal the deal for white. Very, very difficult to see. You know, Pragg played a really natural move here, bishop f5, but after knight b7, then black is back in the game, because queen takes knight, that bishop gets snapped off. So basically white has to exchange queens, and Nepo breathed a big sigh of relief here. White is still better. That bishop is better than the knight, but there are so few pawns on the board. g4. Well, given a few moves, white would love to do this and control those squares, but basically black manages to activate. Nepo brings the knight over. Yeah, if f4, then that's a weak square on e3. So king g2, g6, g5. That's an important move. If you get in g5, you have stability because that knight is not going to be pushed away, and it kind of, it sort of stymies white's majority as well. Although this bishop gets a square, but you can see that black has stabilized here. And knight g6, excellent move. This knight looking to come in on one of these squares, so forces a rook exchange. Yes, the rook is good on the 7th, but actually black is okay here. Bishop e4, you have to try and save the bishop. a5, that rook does a superb job protecting the pawns and stopping anything with f4. Knight g6, and at this point Pragg decided, okay, it's time just to steer the game towards a draw. That knight is hopping around, and he obviously thought, I'm not going to make any progress here, so this basically concedes the draw. Too few pawns on the board, although black's king's a little bit passive, it really doesn't matter. And in this position, they actually agreed a draw. Okay, well, what could possibly happen? Well, let's say rook a7, check, and here you can see we're going to get an exchange of pawns. No, there's not a lot going on in that position, for example. Well, after the game, Pragg was interviewed and he looked down. He said roughly, I achieved the maximum in the Petrov. I think he did, to put Nepo under that much pressure was a real achievement. And the interviewer, Mike Klein from chess.com, said, I sense disappointment in your voice. He said, yes. Pragg said, yes, you don't get too many chances in this tournament, and when you get them, you have to take them. And Pragg sensed that he'd missed something in that game, and he certainly did. But this is a really difficult idea to spot. Queen takes a2, bishop f5. A couple of really nice moves. But a fascinating game. Well, there were actually some extraordinary games today. We had, let me see. Let me try and find the results. Alireza Firouzja played against Hikaru Nakamura. Long game. Firouzja ran short of time and cracked right at the end. Nakamura won. We had Vidit against Caruana. Caruana had a really bad position, but Vidit didn't clinch it. That was a draw. And another long game. Gukesh against Abbasov. Gukesh managed to grind out a win in a queen and pawn endgame. So let me see. That leaves the scores after round 5. And Nepomniachtchi with 3.5. Gukesh with 3.5. Those are the leaders in the tournament. And Nakamura has bounced back up to 2.5 points. Caruana on 3 points. Really interesting stuff. do join me for round 6. Don't forget Svetlana Nemchenko's coverage of the Women's Candidates Tournament on the channel. She's doing a great job, very clear, instructive analysis. I recommend watching her videos. They're excellent. And if you're not a subscriber to the channel, click on that subscribe button and click the bell for instant notifications. Thanks for watching.